For that reason, silver typically is one of the few metals that is sold forward, significantly sold forward by big base metal companies, so they can lock in the value of their byproducts and have a finite, annual and 3-year forecast for their byproducts. So when you look at the short positions on COMEX, for instance.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. In what certainly is shaping up be a very interesting week in the silver market, as we have certainly Inauguration Day coming up and troops headed to Washington. The kind of thing that, while it doesn't seem like it's moved the silver price in the fashion maybe that many were expecting, as I mentioned with last week's call of our physical silver update, customers are buying metal, and we'll see how all these things combine, because fortunately today I'm joined by Brad Cooke of Endeavour Silver, and Brad's also part of the Silver Institute, so seeing so many of these things directly, and really has quite a wide wealth of experience. So Brad, pleasure to have you on the show, and how's everything going with you today?
Hi, Chris. Great to be here. Things are good.
Well, it's exciting to check in with you. We're recording on Monday afternoon, and we see a silver price right around $25 today. And Brad, perhaps even before digging into some of the supply and demand that you see and where you see the market at this point, maybe you could just touch on your background a little bit so people know kind of what you've done, and then we can take it from there.
By all means, I've been in the mining business for more than 40 years, 44 to be exact. I'm an exploration geologist by background and training, a couple of university degrees, and entered into the industry in 1976. Worked for major companies until I went back for a master's degree in 1980, and then set out my own shingle as a consultant and throughout most of the 80s until working for junior companies, I realized that I was perhaps on the wrong side of the table, because one particular junior company went from 40 cents to $8 on the back of my gold discoveries back in the 80s, and my paycheck was still the same. So I got into the public markets in 1988. Never looked back. I founded Endeavour in 2003 and built a mining company that is a top 10 silver producer in the world.
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, you get to see, and in addition, seeing the data of the Silver Institute more than most folks. For example, how much of the, not that there's an exact answer, but we had the mining shutdown last year, which affected the supply. Before we hit the record button, you were talking about some of the trends in supply and demand over the past couple of years. So for someone who's looking at silver, maybe a little bit new to it, what could you share in terms of what's been happening with supply and demand and what you see going forward?
Well, if you look back at the recent history of supply and demand, really the overarching supply is mine supply coming from non-silver mines. Copper, lead, and zinc producers primarily produce a lot of byproduct silver. Silver hangs out with these metals in nature. And if you're a big copper or lead zinc mining company worldwide, you really don't care a whole lot about capturing max value in your silver byproduct. And for that reason, silver typically is one of the few metals that is sold forward, significantly sold forward by big base metal companies, so they can lock in the value of their byproducts and have a finite, annual and 3-year forecast for their byproducts. So when you look at the short positions on COMEX, for instance, silver has by far the largest short position relative to its supply. And that is basically saying that it's primarily a byproduct metal. So that's what you need to know on the supply side. It's a byproduct metal. It's produced by copper, lead, and zinc miners and gold miners. And they tend to hedge their silver. So it's sold forward on COMEX. Flipping over to the demand side, since I entered the silver business in 2003, there's really been 3 disruptive technologies that have really driven the industrial demand. When I arrived in 2003 with the formation of Endeavour Silver, electronic demand was booming, and that's thanks not only to the invention of silver nanofilms and the ability to use silver on all electronic circuits, but the explosion of demand in China as China emerged as a consuming nation. And that was the fastest growing component of industrial demand all the way up until 2010 when solar photovoltaic cells took over. Solar had been around for a couple of decades, but it really wasn't an economic proposition until refining of the technology and support from governments allowed commercial solar installations to explode. And there's still really a fast growing component of electronic demand. I think 100 million ounces of demand went into solar panels last year. And there is a third disruptive technology staring us in the face for silver, but when we talk about the electric vehicle, nobody thinks of silver. They think of lithium and cobalt and nickel and all the battery metals. But wait a minute, these are electric cars, and every electronic circuit requires silver. Last year, the dominantly conventional internal combustion engine automotive sector consumed 55 million ounces of silver, 5% of total supply. And if you believe any of the electric vehicle forecasts going forward over the next decade, that 55 million ounces will triple for automobiles alone, just because of the emergence of EVs. And that's not counting the silver used in the charging stations and the electric supply to the charging stations. It's just silver for the automobile. So that's the third disruptive technology that I think will really take over industrial demand. And then you layer on top of that investor demand, which went dormant for several years and started waking up in the last year and a half. So there's your context for supply and demand.
Yeah, and it seems that with where the world's going, that the demand, economic factors aside, is set to increase. And something that really caught my attention going back 2 or 3 years when we had $14 silver, I mean, we're getting right at or below cost of production for a lot of these miners. Obviously, people hear the cure for low prices is low prices. Can you talk about how and put that in perspective for folks? Even for me, where it seems like it doesn't add up somehow. And again, since you have really some direct insight there, it'd be great to hear.
Well, like all commodities, we go through boom and bust cycles, and silver even more so because it's primarily a byproduct of other metals. So that bull commodity market that really started in around 2000 and culminated in 2011, we built up a lot of supply as well as demand, but we also built up a lot of above ground inventory available for fabrication. And it took years, a multi-year bear market, to whittle down those inventories to the point where when investors started calling for silver in 2018-19, all of the silver available and above ground was there for fabrication, for manufacturers, and very little of it was available for investors. And so the price of silver then had to start rising. Even last year, we bottomed at about 14 and we peaked at north of 28, 29. That's a double in 1 year. That's simply a reflection of the fact that investors started demanding silver and there wasn't enough to go around.
Yeah, and along those lines, Brad, here I've heard a lot of people talk about how with silver, they think it comes down to when the price finally moves, at least historically has been driven when you really get that investment demand kicking in, which like you pointed out, we saw a bit of last year. And you and I, before we hit the record button, we're talking about the amount of silver that's gone into the ETFs. And I'd love to get your comment on this. I always find this interesting. Here's back in 2011. The gray line here is the price. So this is when silver's up at $50. And the blue line is showing how much goes into SLV and the other trusts. So even over those last couple of years where we saw the price coming down, here's 700 million ounces between 2011 and 2017, or you go here, 2018 to a billion. So basically 50% increase, let alone what happened the last year. Any thoughts on that?
Well, this last leg up is investment demand. It's in ETFs getting a lot of cash inflows from investors and putting it to work buying silver off the market. But flat line from basically 2012 to 2018, relatively flat line, was a reflection of the fact that the people who own the silver ETFs, it's very sticky money. Unlike the gold ETF, where those institutions, big institutions, they're hedge funds that they're easy come, easy go, very, very itchy trigger fingers in the gold ETFs. Whereas silver, very sticky money.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason for that, because it's one of those things where once you get it, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, once you understand that the U.S. has basically no possibility of ever repaying its debts. Although there was an interesting story here, Brad, perhaps you have a comment on this one, because Janet Yellen, to make clear that the U.S. doesn't see the weak dollar. So this kind of reminds me of one of those people who say, like, I'm going to get 6-pack abs while they're sitting there, you know, in front of the buffet. I mean, it's great what I think, but here we'll pull up the Fed balance sheet, which I don't think is going to be reversed anytime soon. So she may not want a weak dollar, but I mean, they say this, well, what are the headlines today? Wealthier investing like a bubble is here. I'm sure there's something about stimulus or more printed money. So it's kind of like there's all the reasons to suggest that investors would continue buying silver.
So it's kind of like the saying, do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
Yellen's job is to manage perception of the economy and of the markets. So of course she's going to say we're not going to promote a weak dollar. But when you print money, what does that do? It weakens the purchasing power of the dollar. And so the message is different than the action.
Well, that does seem to be an American political special, although, again, these are just some of the reasons that I think folks like you and I turn to silver. And then again, once people get into silver, there are the silver mining stocks. So I'm going to pull up the Endeavour Silver website, which is one of the bigger silver stocks out there. And for people, especially that think the price of silver is going to rise, I think there's a good case to be made that if that view is correct, that the quality silver projects have a good shot of getting some leverage on that. So Brad, for someone who might be new to Endeavour, could you walk through what they'd be looking at there? So really with the goal of just the people that it's the right fit for can identify that and do further research.
So we're a mid-tier producer of silver. We have 3 high-grade underground mines operating in Mexico. They're primary silver and gold mines. This year about 50-50 gold-silver mix, no base metals. And we produced about 6.5 million ounces of silver in equivalents last year, the only equivalent being gold. And we'll produce about the same again this year. The real drivers or catalysts behind the growth of our production and profits, and the main reasons, the main catalysts for investors to own Endeavour Silver, are primarily our organic growth profile and our success at driving our costs down. Let's start there, actually. You know, we had a pretty tough go in the bear market. We even lost money the last 2-3 years as we initiated sweeping changes in our operations to drive costs down, because historically we were a low-cost producer, and then during the bear market, our costs started drifting higher and higher until we started losing money. In 2019, we actually almost 2 years ago now, we made sweeping changes, started sweeping changes at all 3 of the operations to get those costs back under control. We were remarkably successful. They've been coming down now for several consecutive quarters. And we actually had our best quarter in 2 years in Q4 of last year in terms of production, and we expect in terms of costs. So that's a good place to start. And when you have a rising silver price environment, everybody enjoys that benefit to their revenue side of the balance sheet or of the expense statement, cash flows. But we have falling costs. Unlike most of our peers, we have falling costs. So you get a double whammy in our cash flows. And as a result, you saw our cash in the 3rd and 4th quarter grow by leaps and bounds as cash comes piling into the treasury thanks to the profitable operations. So So that's number one. Number two, we have the best organic growth profile in the sector with not one, but two new silver discoveries that we're proposing to develop. One of them is already permitted, Terranera. We've already completed our pre-feasibility studies. It's in the middle of a final feasibility study due in July. And we do hope to pull the trigger on a production decision, and we're already buying long lead items this quarter and the second quarter. So that mine, what we call the Terranera mine, will effectively double our production and half our costs. So those are the main catalysts for somebody to look at Endeavour.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the advantages where, you know, I think it was tough on everyone, and maybe that's the normal part of the bear market, but some companies don't exist anymore. The ones that it seems like it really required companies to cut down wasteful things, be more efficient. But on the positive side, if you do that successfully, it does put you actually in great position then when the market recovers. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, and you know, typical of a boom and bust cycle, when you're into the bust part of the cycle, you reduce your long-term investing. You're just looking at the short term, waiting for the cycle to turn. So having reduced our long-term investing in mining equipment and people and you know, developing new ore bodies, then you get behind the 8 ball, and that's what happened with Endeavour. What we did primarily in 2019 was opened up our treasury and started investing for the long term again. So we developed new ore bodies that were higher grade, that were more profitable. We invested in hiring bigger and better pieces of equipment. We upgraded our management team at each of the 3 mine sites, and all of this takes money. So recognizing that the cycle was turning, we decided it was time, and thankfully we were right.
Yeah, which is nice. I mean, we were due, right?
We were due, big time.
Although, obviously, you're a silver investor, you've been in this, you understand that there's a lot of people that think the silver price should be higher. I am one of them. Yet, even though it's like you hear day to day, why did silver go down $1 on Friday or things like that? Still, for the silver companies right now, even if the silver price stays at, let's say it stayed at $25 for the next 5 years, and you kept executing your plan, that's still pretty darn good news. Can you put that in context so people can at least know that there's opportunity, whatever happens with the price?
Well, specific to Endeavour's performance in the last couple of quarters last year, we got our cash costs down into the $5-6 range, and our all-in costs are still up in the teens, but we think we can get below 15. And in a $25 price environment, that's $10 of free cash flow per ounce. I'll tell you a quick story. Last year in January, 1 year ago, we were staring at $15 silver. And so we did our annual budget at $15 silver. And it was going to be a tough go. And then in June, when silver finally started to move, we kind of threw out the $15 model and scrambled to do an $18 model. That looked really good. And then in July, things just took off and we threw our models out. So at $25 silver, it's safe to say that everybody in the industry makes a lot of money. Even at $20 silver, the majority of mining companies will make really healthy cash flows, free cash flows. And yes, we also are silver bulls. We think that the silver price has only one direction to go for the next few years. And the reason is very simple. Demand has spiked, supply has not. And because we're primarily a byproduct metal, it takes years to find, permit, finance, develop, and finally bring to production copper, lead, and zinc mines that produce this silver. And in a 7-year bear market, all those projects got put on hold. So we've had 4 consecutive years of falling mine supply, and there's more years of reduced supply coming before the next generation of copper, lead, and zinc mines come to fruition.
Yeah, and along those lines, something I think that has left many silver investors a little bit confused. Some of the silver stocks were actually lower lower even today with $25 silver than the price they were trading when silver was $18 back at the end of December. So I think there's a lot of people that have been seeing this and said, yeah, we think silver is going to go up. They bought the stocks, and there's obviously many different points in the last year where you could market from, but I'm curious what you think's going on there. Is it just a matter of some of the bigger institutional investors are still a little hesitant after 2016 and they haven't jumped in yet? What do you think is behind that?
Well, from the investment side, the first movers are always retail. Main Street gets it, Wall Street doesn't, at least in the silver space. So we were supported by retail throughout the bear market. And then finally, the dedicated precious metal funds, the seriously diminished precious metal funds because of withdrawals, start to put their money back to work in new gold and silver names. And so we saw some new institutional players in the last year and a half come into Endeavour, especially last year. What's missing is the big generalist institutional investor have dabbled in the ETFs, but they haven't come to the companies yet. And that is coming. That's what's ahead of us. As things develop during this cycle and the debt and deficit story becomes more and more important, the declining purchasing power of the dollar becomes more and more important to big investors. They're going to seek more leverage in their gold and silver portfolio than just the ETFs. And that's ahead of us. So some fun times coming.
Yeah, and Brad, I'll try and be delicate the way I asked this one, so we stay on the safe side of compliance here today. But you know how us Americans we have this fetish for investing like pack rats and like lemmings, like piling in the momentum, buying after the price has gone up, selling after it's gone down. We look and see what Bitcoin, whether someone likes it or not, still, even after it was already in the thousands, I think it's a 13 bagger in the last year alone. Tesla is a 19 bagger since the Fed started pumping money in their swap lines a year and a half ago. So if we're correct, and again, this is not legal financial advice, but is at least a dynamic there that you have a very small market that by the time people start piling money in, you can't without, seems to me like it's set for a gap up, and you can answer or comment on that any way you choose.
Well, like I said, in the bear market, fabrication demand approximately equaled new mine supply. And not a whole lot has changed in that formula, except that we have an explosion of investment demand, currently in a corrective or pause mode. And supply is still kind of stuck. The only aspect of growing supply is us primary silver producers, and you can count the number of primary producers on two hands. We could all double our production and we'd barely move the needle. And if you look at 850 million ounces of new mine supply every year, 650 of it comes from copper, lead, and zinc mines. 200 comes from primary silver miners. And we just can't move the needle. We're proposing to double our production in the next 3 years with one mine, and we don't move the needle. So I think, yes, there's going to be some explosive price moves, particularly in silver compared to gold.
Well, then I will add in my list of 2021 things to be grateful for that I know Brad, because when people are scrambling for silver, which I think, despite what Janet Yellen says, I mean, we remember the Greenspan put, silver investors, gold investors, they have the Powell put under, I don't know what else they could do to make clear that they're not going to stop. So Brad, just can you let anything else you'd like to touch on or share about Endeavour that you feel folks should know?
Yeah, sure. Because we only produce silver and gold and no base metals, and we're, I think, one of the very few, if not the only primary silver producer to do that, we have the amongst the highest beta or leverage to the price of silver in our share price. So, and that's bad news when the price of silver is falling because our share price falls faster. Yep. But it's very good news when the price of silver is rising because our share price rises faster. So we are very clearly a great stock to own in the bull market.
Yes, and I'm trying to contain myself. We did an silver options trading webinar last night, and I know you guys do have listed options and the highest leverage to silver. So again, I will behave myself, and that is not by any means suitable or legal financial advice for most people. But Brad, I'm darn glad for what you're doing. Can you give folks the website and the best way to contact you? I've really appreciated meeting Galina in your investor relations, who's great to talk with, laid this out for me clearly one day. And so if people want to go through the investor presentation, look into the numbers, find out if it's something that's suitable for them, how do they best do that?
Well, the website is www.edrsilver.com, Edward David Roger Silver.com.
All right, which we have pulled up here. And oh, I see, there's my old, if you walk through that room, right on the other side of that, that was where my option trading pit was. Back in 2009 and 10, when I first heard about Endeavour Silver, Peter Schiff, my broker there, he put me in some Endeavour shares, and I love that you have laid out pretty clearly the reasons why to invest, and the featured presentation. Wow, it's one of my favorite silver mining websites already. It's clear and simple. Thank you, Brad. Information for all that's in the description field below. So I like to try and keep things as lazy as possible. You don't even have to type it in. Just click there. You can find out more information. And Brad, I just want to thank you again for joining me today. It's great to get the insight you have, because silver really isn't the easiest thing to find information on. So thanks for your years of experience and sharing it with us today.
My pleasure, Chris.